Dad claimed mom cheated on him, so my siblings abandoned her, but the truth about his affair came out after mom passed. Now they blame me for not convincing them. Almost 6 months ago, my mother sat me and my siblings down to deliver the news that none of us ever saw coming. She wanted a divorce from our dad. Now I want y'all to understand how completely unexpected this was. You see, me and my siblings had pretty much grown up in a close-knit, loving family all our lives. Religion played a big role in our upbringing, and our parents were at the center of that. Our home life was shaped by strong values and a deep sense of connection. Every Sunday without fail, we'd all go to church as a family. Even outside of church, we witnessed nothing but respect and kindness between our mom and dad. Our parents were the couple people would look at and say, "That's real love." They always seemed in tune with each other. Evenings in our home were a peaceful affair. After long days, they would settle in together, sometimes with a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, other times just listening to music or the radio as they unwound side by side. They shared laughter and simple moments, the kind that most people think fade as the years go by. Me and my siblings pretty much aspired to have true love like theirs one day. So when our mom told us she wanted a divorce, we thought she was playing a prank on us to see our reactions. We repeatedly asked her if this was a joke, but when she continued to seem serious, we started asking what was up with her. Me and my siblings no longer stayed with our parents, but we did all talk to them regularly, so we thought we knew everything going on between them. It wasn't just the news itself that shocked us, it was that there had been no signs, at least none that we had noticed. My older sister, Murray, was the most vocal. She practically begged mom to tell us why she wanted to divorce our dad, why now, after all these years, when everything was going well between them. But no matter how much Murray pressed, our mom wouldn't give us a clear reason. Instead, she kept repeating that she couldn't live with dad anymore and that she deserved to be happy, as though that was the end of the conversation. For Murray, this wasn't enough. She argued with mom, insisting that happiness didn't have to come at the cost of breaking our family apart. But mom stood firm by her decision and told us how she had held it all in for too long. Dan, my younger brother, also tried to reason with her, hoping to get through in his own way. He asked mom to reconsider, to think about all the good things she and dad had done together as a family. But it was becoming increasingly clear that mom had already made up her mind and there was no wavering in her resolve, no room for negotiation. As for me, out of all my siblings, I've always been the closest to mom. Maybe that's why I didn't feel the need to argue with her as much as Murray or Dan did. I had a gut feeling that there was more to her decision than she was letting on, some deeper reason that she either couldn't or wouldn't share with us just yet. It was like she was holding something she didn't think we were ready to hear, or maybe something she wasn't ready to say out loud. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it weighed heavily on her, and that's why I wasn't so quick to judge her for wanting out. I tried to be the voice of reason between my siblings and mom. I urged Murray and Dan to calm down. I could see mom seemed exhausted by the whole situation and didn't want things to escalate even further. I told my siblings that we could talk about it again later when we'd all had more time to process it. We were all hurt and confused, but there was no need to push mom into saying something she wasn't ready to explain. Later that same day, after my siblings had left and it was just me and mom alone in the quiet of the house, I finally asked her if she wanted to talk. I didn't know what to expect, but I had to ask. That's when everything changed. Mom, who had been so composed, broke down completely. Tears poured down her face, and at that moment, I saw just how much pain she seemed to be carrying. She told me she couldn't explain everything to me right then, but that she wanted me to believe that she just couldn't handle my dad any longer. She told me that she knew me and my siblings wouldn't understand, but that she was doing what she felt was right to protect us. There was a tremble in her voice, a kind of raw emotion that made me believe and sympathize with her. I trusted that mom had thought long and hard about this before saying anything, so I left the conversation at that. In the days that followed, the reality of the situation began to set in. My dad moved out of the house, and went to stay with Murray and her boyfriend, who lived nearby. We did talk to dad about the divorce also. We thought maybe, just maybe, he knew something that we didn't, something that could make sense of all the confusion. But when we approached him, he seemed as lost as we were. He told us that he was blindsided by mom's decision and insisted that he had no idea why she wanted to end things all of a sudden. He said that from his perspective, they always had a happy marriage, and he couldn't think of any major issues that would lead to something as drastic as a divorce. He kept telling us that because he loved mom so much, he didn't want to fight her on this since her mind was made up. So, he was going to give her some time apart and let her think things over. However, Murray has always been a daddy's girl, and having dad live with her only intensified her desire to fix things between our parents. She and dad would often come by our mom's place to talk, sometimes bringing flowers or trying to lighten the mood, hoping to change mom's mind. But no matter how hard they tried, Mom wouldn't budge or reveal anything to Murray. As a result, my sister and Mom would end up in multiple arguments. Murray refused to let the matter rest and constantly blamed my mom for going through with the divorce when nothing seemed blatantly wrong in their relationship. Unfortunately, just as Mom was preparing to file for divorce, she collapsed one day, out of nowhere, as she couldn't breathe properly and was taken to the hospital. There she was diagnosed with lung cancer. This news hit us like a tidal wave. None of us saw it coming. Mom had never smoked a day in her life, which made it even harder to believe that she had developed such an aggressive form of cancer. The doctors were upfront with us. They told us that even with chemotherapy, her chances of survival were slim. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and all of a sudden, the divorce, the arguments, and the confusion seemed to pale in comparison to this looming, unthinkable reality. We couldn't imagine living without Mom. After this news, Murray and Dan, already frustrated with Mom's unwillingness to explain her decision, doubled down on their belief that her sudden choice to divorce Dad was somehow tied to her cancer diagnosis. They convinced themselves that the stress, or maybe even the cancer itself, had clouded her judgment. They started saying things like, maybe Mom's lost her mind or the cancer is making her act this way. It was their way of trying to rationalize her moodiness and that the abruptness of her wanting to leave Dad were symptoms of the illness only and not a decision she had made consciously or for legitimate reasons. Once again, they tried to convince Mom to reconsider, to take Dad back, especially now that she was sick and could use his support. But this time, Mom was firmer than ever. She got pissed and asked them to stop behaving like immature children. She had made her choice, and no amount of pleading or guilt would make her go back on it. That's when things exploded. Murray and Dan began yelling at Mom, accused her of not thinking about the family and claimed that she was hurting all of us, including Dad, by insisting on this stupid decision of hers. It was painful to watch. This is when I couldn't stay silent anymore and stood up for Mom against my siblings. As their arguments escalated, I told my siblings to back off. I reminded them, as calmly as I could, that Mom was an adult who had the right to make her own decisions, even if they didn't agree with them. My words didn't go over well with Murray. This was the first time that I had shown my siblings clearly that I sided with Mom and they didn't like that. Murray just scoffed, clearly furious with me for taking Mom's side when in her eyes, she was the wrong parent in this situation. She told me that Mom's brain wasn't working properly because of the cancer and how Mom would regret leaving Dad in her final moments. She'd realized she had made a huge mistake, but it would be too late to fix it. Her words were cruel and filled with a kind of bitterness I hadn't expected from my sister. I asked her and Dan to leave Mom alone and that even if Dad wouldn't be here, I would be with her every step of the way. They just rolled their eyes at me and left. It was heartbreaking to see how this situation had torn us all apart, not just as a family, but as siblings who were once so close. As the months went by, my life took on a new rhythm, one that revolved around caring for Mom as she went through chemo. As promised, I was the only one there for her consistently. It wasn't easy. Sometimes, I'd catch Mom crying alone in bed, trying to hide her pain from me. Seeing her like that would break my heart because I knew she was going through a lot. Because my mom was busy battling cancer, she had decided to hold off on the divorce for the time being, but she continued to live separately from Dad. In time, I practically moved in with my mom. It just made sense. I worked from home, and it was easier for me to be around to help out when she needed it. I didn't mind a bit. In fact, I felt a responsibility to be there for her, especially since it was becoming increasingly clear that my siblings and Dad were not really concerned for her. They rarely came by to visit, and when they did, it felt forced, almost like a duty they resented. They resented Mom for breaking up the family, and their visits became less about supporting her through cancer and more about showing where their loyalties lay. One day, during our cousin's birthday party, I had finally had enough. Murray brought up Mom's decision again, asking me if she had said anything new about their separation. Her constant questioning was starting to wear me down. I shook my head and told her that Mom hadn't said anything more, but then I asked her something that had been bothering me for a while. Why was she only questioning one parent? Why was Mom always the one under the microscope? If Murray was so desperate for answers, why wasn't she asking Dad just as many questions? It wasn't fair to keep putting all the blame on Mom when clearly both of them were hiding something. Yes, Dad had told us that he was blindsided, but why should we believe him when he might be hiding something from us too? I could sense it, there was more to this story, and it wasn't just on Mom's shoulders. This ended up sparking a huge disagreement between Murray and me. Murray was furious with me for defending Mom yet again, and I was angry that she couldn't see things from a broader perspective. The tension that had been building up for months finally erupted. It felt like all the anger and frustration we had been carrying finally came spilling out. Everyone at the party was staring at us, wondering what was going on. That's when Dad stepped in. He interrupted us, telling us both to keep our mouths shut in front of the rest of the family. He said that he would talk more about this later, but for now, he wanted us to drop it. After the party, Dad finally sat us down, me, Murray, and Dan, and with a serious, almost weary expression, revealed what he claimed was the real reason behind his separation from Mom. He told us that some time ago, back when Mom was still healthy and working, he had caught her cheating on him with one of her co-workers. He didn't go into too many specifics about how he found out, but he said they had fought bitterly over it. According to Dad, after months of tension and arguments, Mom eventually decided to leave him, supposedly because she wanted to pursue happiness with this other man. To say we were stunned would be an understatement. Cheating in a marriage is not taken lightly in our community. I mean, for us, marriage is supposed to be forever, and that is what we had been ingrained with from our childhood. I could feel the shock and confusion settling in the room, and I wasn't sure what to believe. I had never suspected that Mom was involved with someone else. The idea of her having an affair was something I had never even considered. My siblings, especially Murray, were immediately angry, not just at Mom but at the situation itself, at how we had been left in the dark for so long, only to be hit with this bombshell. It was a lot to process. But there was a part of me that found the whole thing hard to believe also. I mean, I had been spending so much time with Mom due to her illness, and nothing about her behavior suggested that she had been unfaithful or that she was hiding such a massive secret. No guy had even shown up to help her out in all the days I had lived with her. I mean, Mom was pretty much allowed to date whoever she wanted now that she was separated from Dad, so where was this supposed mystery man? It didn't fit the image of the woman I had always known. I felt torn between what Dad was saying and what I knew of Mom, who had always seemed honest and upfront with me. Murray and Dan, however, immediately called Mom, demanding answers from her. They brought up Dad's accusations and angrily asked her if this was true. This is when Mom started to laugh. She called the whole thing ridiculous and petty, saying that Dad was grasping at straws to make himself look like the victim when the reality was very different. Mom was adamant that she had never cheated on Dad. She was furious at him for trying to paint her in a bad light and even went as far as to call him a sick, disgusting man who was trying to ruin her life, even in her final days. She was clearly hurt, not just by Dad's accusations but by the fact that this drama was unfolding and my siblings were actually believing his nonsense and questioning her about it. However, my younger brother, Dan, kept pushing and told Mom that she needed to tell us her version of the story and that if she continued to stay silent, it would just mean that Dad might be telling the truth after all. He pointed out that after all, Dad was the only one willing to talk, the only one putting a narrative forward, and that made Mom's silence seem more like an admission of guilt. Mom simply replied that she didn't want to ruin our image of a family and was adamant that in her final days, she just wanted peace and time with us. She begged us to stop pestering her about Dad and the divorce. But Dan and Murray were not having it. They felt betrayed and angry, because Mom constantly dodged the full story. They told her, in no uncertain terms, that they were done with all the hiding. They were sick of it, sick of being kept in the dark, and if she wasn't willing to tell them the truth, then they would cut her off completely. I was taken aback by their sudden decision. I tried to calm them down, but Dan and Murray seemed determined. They were done. In their eyes, Mom had betrayed them by cheating on her husband, and because I had chosen to support her, they saw me as a traitor too. I couldn't believe it when they told me that since I had chosen the cheating parent, I didn't deserve to be a part of their family anymore. I was devastated to see my own siblings had turned their backs on me. It felt incredibly painful to realize that in their eyes, I had become the enemy simply because I chose to stand by Mom when she needed me the most. In the end, Dan and Murray cut off all contact with Mom, refusing to speak to her or see her during her illness. They also cut me off, leaving me to care for Mom alone. I did make multiple attempts to convince Murray and Dan to change their minds by reaching out again and again, hoping that maybe they would realize how little time was left with Mom and how much they would regret not being there for her when it was too late. But every time I tried, they shut me down and basically shunned me. Whenever I spoke to Dad about it also, trying to reason with him and get him to encourage my siblings to reconcile before it was too late, his responses were always cold. He would dismiss my pleas, saying that my ungrateful Mom deserved what was coming to her, as if her cancer was some form of karmic retribution. It was incredibly painful to hear him speak about Mom that way. After months of watching Mom's health decline, she finally passed away in her sleep. I remember just holding her body and sobbing uncontrollably. I don't think I will ever be able to forgive my siblings for what they did to my Mom. They didn't say goodbye, didn't offer her a single ounce of forgiveness or comfort during her last days. No matter what issues they had with her, she was still our mother, and she deserved to have her children by her side as she took her last breath. After her funeral, we found out that Mom had left her entire inheritance to me. All her savings, her personal belongings, everything she had was signed over to me in her will. I was a little taken aback at first when her lawyer revealed this. Even though I was the closest with Mom, I didn't expect to be the sole heir. But then again, after seeing how my siblings had treated her in her last days, cutting her out of their lives without a second thought, I couldn't say I was exactly surprised by this decision. Mom must have felt abandoned by them, just as I had, and this was her way of ensuring that at least someone who cared for her until the end was taken care of in return. Of course, my siblings were not happy with this and questioned the lawyer if my mom was really in the right state of mind while making her will. Their sheer audacity to expect Mom to leave them something while they had not even bothered checking up with her when she was slowly dying was laughable. I didn't even bother arguing with them and just left them standing there looking pissed at me. I was happy with my mom's decision about the inheritance since I was the only child who had genuinely cared for her until her last breath. After Mom's death, I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Technically, it belonged to Dad only, even though Mom had helped him pay it off during their marriage. Before Dad could move back in and kick me out, I decided to move out as soon as possible. While packing up things, I found a letter that Mom had left behind in one of her drawers. It was addressed to me and my siblings. In the letter, Mom revealed the truth that she had kept hidden from us all along. Turns out, it was Dad who had been the one who was unfaithful during their marriage. She wrote about how she had caught him cheating with his secretary multiple times over the recent years. It wasn't just a one-time thing, it had happened over and over again, and each time, Dad had tried to make her feel like she was the problem instead of him. He had gaslighted her, making her question her own reality and emotions instead of taking any responsibility. The man who we had grown up admiring, who had always seemed so loving and devoted, had been living a lie, and he had put Mom through unbearable pain in the process. Mom explained that after the fourth or fifth time she caught him in the act, she had finally had enough. That's when she decided to leave him. It wasn't because she didn't love us, it was because she deserved happiness and respect also. She couldn't stay in a marriage where she was constantly being betrayed and emotionally manipulated by her husband. But, heartbreakingly, she also shared that she never wanted us to know the full truth. She wrote about how much we had idealized their marriage and how much she feared shattering that image for us. She didn't want us to feel like we had to choose sides or to hate our father, no matter what he had done. So, she had chosen to stay silent, even as it caused her immense pain. However, Dad had taken advantage of her silence. Instead of owning up to his mistakes, he further twisted the story and told us that Mom was the one who had been unfaithful since he knew Mom would continue to remain silent. It was shocking to realize how manipulative he had been, how he had made himself look like the victim while Mom, already dealing with the devastation of her illness, had been forced to carry the weight of his lies. In the letter, Mom expressed how deeply grateful she was to me for not believing Dad's lies, and for standing by her when no one else would. She knew that I had been the only one who trusted her through it all, and she thanked me profusely for giving her comfort and support during her final months. She wrote about how much it hurt her that Murray and Dan had sided with Dad, believing his version of the story without question. She was devastated by how they made her final moments on Earth even more difficult than they already were, which is why she had decided to leave behind this letter that had the entire truth. Reading her words, I was overcome with both sorrow and anger. I finally understood why she had been so insistent on leaving Dad, why she hadn't wanted to explain herself in detail to us. I felt a deep sense of loss for my siblings, who had chosen to believe a lie, cutting off their mother when she needed them the most. I could have sent my siblings a picture of Mom's letter right then and there, but after seeing how they had behaved at Mom's funeral, I was pissed off by their entitlement behavior. So, I decided to keep it quiet for the time being and made up my mind that I would reveal Mom's secret to them only at the right time. It has been a few weeks since I last spoke to my siblings, and I thought I was finally finding some peace after the chaos surrounding Mom's death. But then, yesterday, I received a call from Murray and Dan. They wanted to talk about Dad, who, it turns out, was now living with his secretary at the house we once called home. This was a surprise to them since they didn't know what I knew already. Murray questioned me if I had any idea what was going on with Dad or if I had talked to him. I scoffed, and reminded her that I was no longer a part of their family in their eyes, so how could I possibly know what Dad was up to? Dan chimed in, sharing that Dad had basically cut off all communication with them after Mom's funeral. He was now busy playing happy family with this young woman who also wanted nothing to do with them. It was surreal for them to see how quickly Dad had moved on. My siblings recounted how they had tried to show up at Dad's place, only to be turned away by this woman. Dad had come out to speak to them and told them that he needed some time away from them and that he was happy with his new girlfriend. I could feel their hurt through the phone. Now, They wanted to reach out to me for help, and suggested how I should try to talk to Dad, to reach out and ask how he was doing since according to them, Dad might still be grieving. At that moment, I decided it was time for me to share the truth. I told them about the letter Mom had left behind, how she had opened up about Dad's affair with his secretary long before she had passed away, and the manipulation she had endured over the years. I knew my siblings would find it hard to believe me, so I even sent them photos of the letter, knowing they couldn't argue against her words anymore. As you can imagine, instead of the understanding and remorse I hoped for, my siblings immediately turned on me. They were furious, claiming I had knowingly kept this truth from them all along and accused me of manipulating my way into getting all of Mom's inheritance, as if I had somehow plotted this from the start. It was infuriating to hear their accusations. In their anger, they insisted that I should have tried harder to convince them of Mom's innocence and how they had only believed Dad and taken his side at the time because he was the only one willing to talk with them about the separation. I reminded them that Mom never wanted anyone to take sides, all she needed was for them to stop hounding her and to spend time with her as she was dying. I emphasized that Mom was a grown woman who didn't owe us any explanations for her choices, but all they had done was make her feel bad and blamed her cancer-ridden body for her decision. Since then, my siblings have been texting me about how they feel guilty about everything that has happened and are now asking for my forgiveness for not having supported Mom. They think I'm being too harsh on them, claiming they didn't know the whole story so they should not be blamed for their actions. Am I the a-hole for continuing to be pissed at my siblings for believing our cheating dad over our mom? Update 1. I'm relieved that the general consensus is that I'm not the bad guy in this situation. I'm really grateful I stayed by my mom's side, even though my sleazy dad would have preferred for her to be alone in her final days. For everyone asking why I didn't confront him, why should I? Do you really think that guy is going to accept what he did? Do you honestly believe he'll acknowledge his mistakes? Absolutely not. A man who would try to turn his own children against his dying wife is someone I no longer want to be related to. Looking back, I realize I was at fault for always idealizing our parents' marriage and believing that everything was perfect between them. God only knows what else my dad might have put my mom through. As some of you suggested, this may not have even been his first affair. He could have done this before, and my mom might have endured it silently before. However, now that all the children had moved out and she had her own savings, Mom had finally seen this as a chance to stand up for herself. It's unfortunate that cancer took her life before she could enjoy the rest of her days. My mom deserved a better husband, and she also deserved better children than my siblings, who would have probably continued to side with my dad and would have never felt guilty about their decisions if Mom hadn't written that letter to us. Update 2. I just wanted to update everyone that my siblings confronted Dad about everything. They showed him pictures of Mom's letter and demanded he tell them the truth. Eventually, Dad broke down and admitted that he had been in love with his secretary for a long time but never had the guts to leave Mom. He confessed that the woman is now pregnant, which is why he moved her into the house immediately after Mom's passing. This means that while my mom was dying, my dad was busy having his secret affair behind all our backs and acting like a victim to our faces. After this confession, my siblings had no doubts left and yelled at my dad for lying to them. Later, Murray and Dan did call to apologize and told me about how the confrontation with Dad went. However, I am pretty much done with them. I've asked them to leave me alone for the time being and will only contact them in the future if I can ever forgive them. Update 3. It's been 5 months since my last update. I have been seeking therapy to deal with Mom's passing, as her absence has been really hard on me. I've heard from my siblings, with whom I maintain a somewhat decent relationship, that Dad's young girlfriend has finally given birth. Given his old age, he's now facing the challenge of parenting all over again. My siblings are outraged and have cut off all contact with him.